boys and girls, welcome to my channel. I'm for Classic and welcome to BenchART. So for today what I do have in it is Persona 5 Strikers, a game developed by P Studio and Omega Force, and they are using their in-house engine. So for the settings, this is what I do recommend for the MX130 or the GT940 MX. Just play at 720p, lock the game at 30 frames per second, and use the median settings, but I do recommend you to raise the texture quality to high. Doing this, you will be having a blast experience on Persona 5 Strikers. So first of all, before the results, let me show you the requirements. So these guys ask for a GTX 660 or an AMD Radeon HD 7870. Both these graphic cards, despite older, they are stronger than the MX130. These are the results that I did got without recording on this first sequence, which I will show you. Which is a very big battle in a very open map. So at 900p median settings, the experience the average was above 30, but the game was lower than 30 frames per second. While 720p maximum settings, median settings, or low settings, all of these three settings did provide an experience above 30 frames per second, but the average wasn't really able to reach 60. So unfortunately, just like many other Japanese titles that have been released on the PC, these games doesn't really support frame skipping, which means that if you target 60 frames per second and you don't have those 60 frames per second, the game will start to run at slow motion. Even if you are running at 55 frames per second, which is a very good frame rate, your game will run at a slower speed than it was supposed to, because it doesn't support frame skipping. And since none of these settings, even 720p low settings, I wasn't able to achieve a 60 frames per second stable inside this game, I decided to lock the game at 30 frames per second. So I decided to use this specific scene as benchmark moment, because like I told you, it is very intense, lots of enemies, lots of attacks, lots of shadows going on. And this is very intensive comparing to the rest of the sequences that I did play. For example, in this specific sequence, I'm able to stress the GPU to 900% at some points and at some attacks, while the rest of the game, while traversing the city or just doing any regular dungeons inside the game, the GPU usage was between 40 to 60, in the worst case scenario 70%. So if you want to play the game at 720p maximum settings or even 900p median settings, I'm pretty sure you will be alright with a lock of 30 frames per second, and you can play it above those 30 frames per second. But what I'm afraid of is that if you find more sequences like that battle sequence that I did find that you will find, I mean, at the beginning of the game won't be able to hold on to those 30 frames per second. So that's why I decided to go with 720p median settings with textures on high, because if more of those moments do appear, at least I do know that the game will run super stable. And while if I go with 900p median or something above of that, or even 720p maximum settings, I will never know if it will handle some of the most demanding battle sequences. Alright, but for the most part, as far as I have saw, most of the game will run much better than that initial moment. Alright, so I think that's all that I want to talk about the performance. Let's now talk a little bit about the game. So Persona 5 Strikers, it is not really what I was expecting. At first I thought this game was simply a spin-off from Persona 5, and at some point it is, but it's not entirely the case. Persona 5 Strikers, it is a sequel to Persona 5 in its story. So Persona 5 Strikers takes place 6 months after the events of Persona 5, so which makes it a sequel. So all the story that you are going to see inside this visual novel, it's going to take place after the events of Persona 5. So this is a sequel. But in other hands, it is also a spin-off, because contrary to the previous Persona's games, which have been using turn-based combat, Persona 5 Strikers takes a different approach, as you saw in the video, and you have kind of a real-time combat that resembles kind of a crossover between Dynasty Warriors and Persona gameplay. So this might be kind of a hit and miss for the fans, because the fans might want to have more of Persona 5 story, and that's fully okay, but they also might want to have the same combat approach as the predecessors, and that's not really possible in Persona 5 Strikers, since they now moved on to some kind of real-time combat. For me it is fine, but it is different. I can no longer relax as much when I'm playing this game in combat mode. You no longer have that full time to think and take your own decision. So it's a different combat style, but above all, the game itself, the visual novel moments, your friends and all that kind of stuff remains as is, as you know before. Alright, that's the good part. It isn't being as well received as the other Personas. For example, Persona 5 scores between 90 to 95 on Metacritic, while Persona 5 Strikers, it is a slightly lower score, with scores between 80 to 90, mostly between 85 to 90. So it's still an awesome game, but it is just different, alright? And that's the thing that might be scaring some people away, especially huge fans from Persona, from this game. But still, yeah, it's a sequel, so if you want to know more of the story, you need to play this one. So on Steam, you know, I'm quite surprised because the score on Steam, it is 96%. Usually people criticize the Japanese ports, but as far as I've seen the port, it is, you know, it's good. It's a good port. It fails a little bit with some stuff like the frame skipping, which is not supported, and this is very usual on Japanese titles. So you either need to go with 30 frames per second or 60, depending on what your machine can achieve. It is also the maximum frame rate, it is also 60 frames per second. This is very typical on Japanese games too. But everything just works, keyboard and mouse works, gamepad works, everything just works fine. The only thing that I feel that could be better implemented, it is the anti-aliasing inside the game. It's a blur filter that also affects the text, so despite I'm using in this video, this is something that I do recommend you to turn off. If you want to use anti-aliasing, you can use the resolution scaling if your machine can handle it, and use values above 1.0. Of course, this is something that is not possible on my laptop GPUs, since they struggle a little bit with this game. So I think that's all that I want to talk about Persona 5 Strikers. Hope you keep enjoying the rest of the gameplay, which is just this dungeon, and I do hope to see you soon. Goodbye.
Take this! Take this! Persona! Full! Let's go! Take this! I'll get them! Persona! Ravage them!
Ooh, you got it. The enemy became a... Enemy ahead! Joker, try that persona you just got!
Let's go! Pixie! You're mine!
Let's focus on the big shadow for now.
Come! Ravage them!
Let me help.
Ravage them! Take this! Right here! Persona!
Time to
It's over!
That's Joker for you!
Showtime! Pixie! Here!
Whoa! Looking cool, Joker!